All right, welcome everybody. It's just 4 o'clock now, so we will get started. And welcome to those here that are part of our live studio audience, as well as everybody that is on Zoom as well. And it is the 8th annual Acadia Winter Festival. So very glad to have you all here for the festival, either in person or remotely. And hopefully everybody's warming up after being outside. We're looking at animal tracks today and also working on pottery. And tomorrow there's a moss and lichen walk. There was also an iNaturalist session this morning. So lots of things happening. So thanks for joining us. I'm Nick Fisichella. I'm the president and CEO with Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. We're a nonprofit partner of the National Park Service and a center for inspiring science, learning, and community for a changing world. And so along with our National Park Service partners, we lead this research learning center here at the tip of the Schoodic Peninsula. And so our work here, our science and education, is really about understanding the consequences of environmental change and then engaging people in the science and solutions. And there's lots of science, lots of education that happens here within Acadia National Park. There's actually over 80 research projects every year happening here. So many of them are led by Schoodic Institute scientists, but also lots of other researchers that come here to really this amazing place, this protected area, to understand Acadia, understand the dynamic nature here and how it's changing. And actually one of those people that's done great research here in Acadia is our speaker tonight, Sarah Nelson. And Sarah is really, I think, an exemplar of the type of amazing scientist that's drawn to working here and leading science here that then has impacts across a much larger landscape than just Acadia National Park. And one example of that is the Dragonfly Mercury project, which actually Sarah and some folks here at Schoodic Institute, Bill Zellick, who's in the audience here, worked on this project. And it's a citizen science-based project collecting dragonfly larvae and using them as indicators of mercury, levels of mercury pollution in ecosystems. And this project has really informed management and managers here at Acadia, and has now been applied at over 120 National Park Service units across the US. So it's a great example of some of the really cool science that starts here in Acadia and then gets utilized far beyond the boundary of this wonderful park. And so we're really happy to have Sarah with us here to talk about winter. Very appropriate for our festival. And Sarah is now the Director of Research at the Appalachian Mountain Club. Prior to AMC, she worked at the University of Maine for 21 years. Most recently as an associate research professor in the School of Forest Resources, and also as the director of the program in ecology and environmental sciences. And so her research really on geochemistry of lakes, also climate change with a focus on changing winters, which I think we'll be hearing about today, and mercury contamination, which I was just telling you one of her projects. For about a decade, she worked with high school teachers and Schoodic Institute in a series of projects focused on teacher professional development, mercury in watersheds, snowpack, climate, and data literacy. And is now working with teachers and community partners in the Merrimack River watershed. So we're super happy to have Sarah with us today to tell us about the edge of winter. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really glad to be here to talk about this. Actually, when I did my PhD way back in the early 2000s, I studied mercury in snow at Acadia. So seems like my research history is a little odd with mercury and winter, but actually I began studying both of those things together. So to me, it makes perfect sense. But today I'm going to talk about a variety of research projects, syntheses, trend analyses that we've been doing related to changing winters in the Northeast. really starting about 5 years ago with collaborators at the University of New Hampshire, as well as University of Winnipeg and Hubbard Brook Research Foundation. And coming to AMC, I have started working with Georgia Murray, who's on my staff, who does climate research over by Mount Washington, as well as a graduate student, Gabby Wolf-Gonzalez and Sandra de Stone at UMaine, who worked on a piece of this specific to Maine. So first, I thought I would give you a quick overview of the Appalachian Mountain Club, the organization. Now, as I mentioned, the director of research. The AMC, much like Schoodic Institute, is really all about fostering protection, enjoyment, and the understanding of the outdoors. And our headquarters is over by Pinkham Notch. It's kind of a scene from the top of the White Mountains, looking at a winter scene. But we cover territory all the way from Washington, D.C. up to Maine. And I think a lot of folks think of AMC as the people who make maps. We do that. Larry Garland in my office works on lots of the maps and guides you may have in your pocket, including ones at Acadia and other places in the Northeast. Some people think of AMC as a place that has lots of lodges and huts. Our high elevation huts in the White Mountains are famous, and camps and other facilities where you can stay. And these are great places to stay if you're out hiking, put your boots up. But we also work on a number of other aspects. So AMC is not simply a hiking club. We do trails work around the region. We work on advocacy. So working to move the needle on some of these important issues about the outdoors. Land protection and management. So managing actual lands that we own or that we partner with others to manage. And then my field, which is the science piece. I'm going to try your new cool pointer. There, so AMC research, that's my department. We work on science related to this area to support all of these other pieces of our mission. And again, I'll mention where we work. We don't usually work in the Adirondacks. That's highlighted on this map as it was part of a high elevation areas piece that we did do, but really the northern Appalachian Mountains. So again, from Washington, D.C. to Maine is our area of interest. And here in Maine, since we're standing in Maine right now, we work in the White Mountains, which are largely in New Hampshire, but certainly lap over into Maine and really gorgeous part of the mountains. And Maine's 100-mile wilderness area. This is up north, kind of bordering Namakonta and near Baxter State Park. So I thought I'd kind of give a quick detour on that. AMC does now own 100,000 acres in the 100-mile wilderness area. We co-manage the Appalachian Trail portion in there, but we own these lands and we do sustainable forestry. Some of the lands are managed as eco reserves and as carbon projects for carbon sequestration to try to mitigate climate change. And there's been a ton of work recently on fish passage. We've done over, I believe, 50 culvert replacements, expanding the size of culverts in part as a response to climate change, and putting in large wood additions to help with fish habitat. And last summer, I couldn't resist going out to a huge place where there was almost no research. I had an intern who started characterizing some of the over 50 lakes that are on MWI, some of which really hadn't been studied at all. And my intern who bushwhacked to many of these places, felt like maybe they hadn't even been visited in decades. So north of here, this great big conservation project. But again, I lead the AMC research team for the entire area where we work. And our goal in our research mission is really to provide the science to underpin all of the advocacy positions and the policy work that we do. So it's really an organization that takes science seriously and takes the science that we do and moves it forward into the policy arena. That's why I'm really excited to work in this position. And so one of those issues is climate change. So for folks that historically thought of AMC as a hiking club or a place that you can go and stay when you're hiking in the mountains in a facility. Some people would ask, why are you getting into climate change? What does that have to do with this? But really, climate change threatens all of those experiences of the outdoors, not only our ecosystems, but also thinking about all of the recreational experiences that we want to share with people who are out in the Northeast. And this is an image from a recent report. I'll talk about the data and that are related to this in a few minutes. But really here we have a cross-country skier who's on the UNH ski team. And he's saying in this little vignette, he never thought that he would have to train indoors on roller skis in the winter in New Hampshire. And that's sort of one of the pieces that we may be losing about winter. So we kind of work along three aspects of climate change in terms of our priorities. Of course, understanding climate change, that's the science, what's going on? Where do we stand? How does this work? What's going to happen with climate change? And focusing largely on changing winters, which I'll talk about today, as well as mountain ecosystems and climate change refugia, which I'll also touch on. And we have ongoing air quality research because the greenhouse gases that are causing climate change are an air quality issue. Sharing what we know, we do community or citizen science as well, and I'll talk about two of those projects today. And we have an education team, so we interact with them to update their curricula around climate change. And then taking action, I mentioned the carbon projects. We have a net zero commitment, conserving land, and working again in lockstep with policy. So climate change in the US. This is sort of a background of what temperatures have been doing across the country. We've seen rising temperatures as an effect of increasing greenhouse gas emissions globally and in the US. We have seen increasing precipitation, so more rain coming down across the US. This graphic is showing us over 100 years from about 1900 to after 2010, increasing precipitation at the national scale. And this map has percentages on it that are showing us extreme precipitation, so big rainstorms. And I think most of us can remember when we've had a lot of these in recent years, over an inch of rain in 24 hours. The Northeast is one of the areas that has the highest increase in these kind of extreme events. So this is sort of the national picture of climate change. And we can see that it's happening really rapidly in our region in the Northeast. We have rising temperatures, more hot days. I do not love hot weather, so this is one of the graphics that bothers me. We also are seeing earlier snow melt. The map up here on the right from our colleagues, I'm not great with my right hand, at the USGS is showing us earlier snow melt in the Northeast, as shown by stream flows occurring earlier. And then again, the Northeast and the upper Midwest tend to have more extreme events than in the past. And in Maine, our winters are warming faster than all of the other seasons. We've seen increases in the minimum temperature. This is usually at nighttime when it's the coldest part of the day. Minimum temperatures in winter are really important because that's what keeps the snow around. If you don't get below freezing at night, you're really going to start melting your snowpack. And mean, or the average winter temperatures, are also increasing over 5 degrees Fahrenheit in Maine since about the 1890s, according to the Maine Climate Council's Scientific and Technical Subcommittee. So for today's presentation, I'll give you a quick tour of a recent group of studies that look at a few different spatial scales, so across the entire region, also within just Maine. I have a couple of figures there, and then some detailed results from specific sites in the White Mountains or the Mount Washington area, and a couple of pieces for Acadia specifically. I'll also look at both back in time. We have one study that used 100 years of data from National Weather Service stations. Some studies have had shorter periods of time, and I'll indicate that, but also looking forward. So just last week, we published a paper with projections of winter indicators through the year 2100. So now we can look back and then take those same winter indicators and look forward. It's not even 100 years anymore, 80 years to 2100. So in thinking about doing this talk, I didn't want to just present sort of, bad news science. We're losing winters. Things are warming up. This could be bad news, although some people do like warmer weather. So I polled my friends online and asked them, what do they love about winter? And if anyone in the room wants to shout out anything that you love about winter, we could start there. Snow, that's a big one. Anything else? The cold, yep. Skiing, absolutely. Hot chocolate. I made hot chocolate yesterday in that big storm. So yeah, lots of the same things came up, and I thought I would organize some of our research findings around those themes, and you all echoed them. So these folks had a chance to write out what they loved about winter. Some of them were quite poetic, but they kind of grouped into thinking about the quiet and the solitude of winter, the absolute quiet after new fall and snow, how snow quiets the world, solitude on the trail. So some really great reflections on winter that one set of folks really centered on this quiet and solitude piece. And to me, as Nick said, that means snow. That blanket of snow feels like it's quieting everything down. So our indicators of changing winters, one of them is related to snow. And here's where the bad news comes in. We are losing the snow in the Northeast. So I'm going to show a few slides from this particular study, and they'll all look pretty similar. Essentially, we had data from the National Weather Service across the kind of upper Midwest to Eastern US, where we are, and up into Eastern Canada. And we broke it into 3 sub-regions. And where we are right now in New England, we just called East. So this is kind of what we're looking at for our region. And there's a map with dots. The size of the dot is related to the rate of change in winter indicators. So how many days of snow cover are we losing, for example? The bigger the dot, the more days of snow cover we're losing. And then each figure is coupled with a plot. And so for here in the East, we can see the trends and whether they were significant, if they're colored red or blue, or not significant, gray. Essentially a line tipping down that is red means that we've lost winter at a significant rate over 100 years. So these were all of the weather stations that had 100 years of data in this region where we had sufficient data to model snow. And we see that we've got about 19 fewer snow-covered days in the Northeast region where we are right now, kind of in New England, New York, and Atlantic Canada since 1917. And so kind of a White Mountain specific piece, but we've lost about a foot of snow. Hubbard Brook Research Foundation and Hubbard Brook scientists have measured snow since 1956, and we've lost about a foot of snow there in that time period. So that's a little bit startling. Similarly, in the White Mountains, our research offices are located over here at Pinkham Notch. And then this is the summit of Mount Washington, the tallest peak in the Northeast. We just used the data that are available recently from these 2 locations, which were actually started in the 1930s by Joe Dodge. There's a place called Joe Dodge Lodge right near our offices. And this is the person that started a lot of the facilities right there at Pinkham Notch that are still AMC facilities. And he also began measuring temperatures and snow cover back in the 1930s. Those data at these sites are continuing today as Weather Service cooperative observer sites and with AMC staff who take measurements as well. So we have data from the 1930s from Pinkham and the summit, looking at snow. And we are also losing snow even in the mountains. So at Pinkham Notch, we're losing, these are different units, but about 1.7 centimeters, 1.7 days earlier per decade of snow melt. So snow is melting a little bit earlier. And then less maximum snowpack, the snow on the ground, 11.5 centimeters less per decade at Pinkham Notch. So this was significant in that these were data points for mid elevation. Pinkham Notch is pretty up there. It's kind of the tip of a notch when you're driving through the White Mountains, and the peak of Mount Washington. And these were the first time these trends really were significant. They did a similar analysis 15 years earlier, and the trends in warming and snow loss weren't significant. Now they've kind of flipped over that edge. So we may be getting to an inflection point. It's hard to tell till we get to the future, but we can now, using this new paper, came out about last week, that projects 2100, see what we think the future holds for snow cover. So this is a very messy looking graph, and I'll explain this one, and then I have some other examples. There are sort of a big pile of spaghetti looking lines. This is a set of ensemble climate models. You're running a whole group of climate models and looking at where the average sort of falls, and that's the darker line in the middle in each spot. There we have, these models are run from 1980 to about the present to calibrate, make sure they match up. And that's what's called historical here. And then the models are run forward in time. And we have two different sets of lines of spaghetti here, a blue one and a red one. So the blue one, and these are the projections, but the blue line is if we run the models assuming a low greenhouse gas emissions scenario. This is the one scientists will call RCP 4.5. The red lines, and we're looking at the average of those models, is the higher emissions scenario, and that's the track we're essentially currently on. And we can see that it matters what we're emitting to the atmosphere. We stand to lose, in this example, for the Northeast, we could go from having about 40 inches of snow across our region down to 30 inches if we're on the low emissions pathway. But if we do continue on our high greenhouse gas emissions pathway, we're talking about half as much snow by the year 2100. So we can look at these projections. And Dr. Burkowski, who was the lead on those modeling studies, pulled out some specific sites for me for Maine. We pulled out Jackman, Bangor. Maine has these 3 climate divisions, and Acadia. And we're looking at the projections here for all 3. They're all showing us this downward tilt in snowfall at all of these different sites going into the future. And specifically for Acadia here on the right, by the end of the century at 2100, you're really looking at, if we're on a high emissions pathway, maybe a month of days with snow. So yeah, we stand to lose a good amount of snow, but the positive message is that we could change that if we're looking at different emissions pathways. So another piece that people listed when I asked what they love about winter, a couple people mentioned one of my favorite things, no bugs. But really more importantly, winter is kind of a reset. So everything dies. Not everything actually does die, but things go dormant. There are killing temperatures for some insects, especially those that are potentially invading from other locations. And so that theme of a reset really made me think of our winter indicators for cold. Cold temperatures are important, and we're losing the cold temperatures as well. So similar to what the numbers of snow cover days that we've lost around the broader region in 100 years, about 20 fewer what we called frost days, days when the minimum temperature dipped below freezing, have occurred in the past 100 years. And so we saw that across the region. And I'll point out again, in a lot of these maps, the New England and New York area tend to be where these trends are the greatest rates of change and the most consistent. So the dots are large and they're all sort of the same color, trending the same way. So losing the cold. We were also able to pull thresholds out of the literature for cold temperatures that will limit the spread or kill certain insects, like pine beetle, southern pine beetle. There are temperature thresholds that you can pull from the literature and look at how many of the days cold enough to kill pine beetles are happening and how that has changed in 100 years. And we've lost about 2 weeks of those days cold enough to kill the pine beetles. And similarly, mosquito kill days, the mosquitoes that can transmit some of the human pathogens that we worry about. We didn't see yet any trends in hemlock woolly adelgid kill days. They need a pretty cold temperature in order to kill them, and we haven't lost too many of those yet, but remains to be seen. So here is one figure specific to Maine, and actually I'll back up to note this paper was wonderful to work on and to work with these data, but based on the criteria we had for the 100 years of data, we ended up only using 1 point for the state of Maine, which is Portland. So anyone who runs around Maine at all, you know that Portland is not the weather we're getting everywhere. So with the graduate student, Gabby Wolf-Gonzalez at UMaine, we shortened the time period to 50 years. And then she was able to use sites all across Maine in the 3 different climate divisions, from the northern to the interior to the coast where we're sitting today, and run these same indicators and figure out what's going on. So Gabby did that for the same winter indicators, and specific to these extreme cold or pine beetle kill days. You might see here that the coast is definitely losing those days at a more consistent sort of pattern. And we did have a couple of sites where we're not losing the extreme cold days, kind of over here in the mountains, the dots, not the downward facing triangles. And so one of these was Rangeley, which was our highest elevation site in the database. And high elevations could be places that are hanging on to the cold, but possibly in the future, they could stand to lose more because they may be getting close to a threshold. So keeping the cold is an important research topic that's really gaining momentum. People will call it climate change refugia, or areas that remain relatively buffered from changes in the climate. And Tony Lynn Morelli, who's at the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center at UMass, also US Geological Survey, has published on this extensively. And here's one of her figures that's showing us how it's possible that mountains could act as climate change refugia, because mountains are topographically complex, right? You can go around the north face and there's still snow, whereas it might be melted off on the south face. They can have deep valleys that can keep cold and keep snowpack intact. Lots of conifer or softwood trees that can help to keep it cooler. So it's possible that there are areas on the landscape, like some aspects of mountains or some other places, where we can hang on to the cold and potentially allow time for species to move or adapt as climate continues to change. However, as I mentioned, these are more of the data from Pinkham Notch and the summit of Mount Washington, showing that we are warming in those 2 sites. The mean temperature is increasing even at the summit of Mount Washington. So even if we are having hopefully some climate change refugia at mountaintops, it's uncertain how long that will be able to maintain. And again, in terms of temperatures across Maine, we'll see this warming according to the projections looking into the future at these sort of sites across all of the climate divisions. So losing the cold And again, our trajectory, our pathway in terms of greenhouse gas emissions matters. Okay, so a lot of folks mentioned, getting out and skiing, spending time outdoors. Recreation is a biggie in winter, and it's wonderful to live in a place where people see it snow and are like, yes, let's go skiing. And so folks really love getting out in the winter. It's quieter. The parking lot isn't quite as crowded. A friend out at Mount Rainier was noting the same thing. And cross-country skiing, skiing the powder, seeing the animal tracks. Sounds like you might have done some of that earlier, possibly. Recreation is a big one, winter recreation. And so again, just like we had special temperature thresholds for bugs, we can look at the data from the past 100 years or in the future and look at temperature thresholds to make snow at ski areas. So snowmaking days. And these thresholds, there are numbers that are in the literature. We use -5 degrees Celsius, but technology is always improving. Ski area operators now are often able to make snow at -2. So it's possible that technology will keep us ahead of some of this. But using the -5 threshold that's widely used, we saw that we have lost snowmaking days before February 28th. This is sort of a time period threshold. It's an important date, kind of school vacation weeks, and ski areas hope to be able to make lots of snow before then so they can have good runs by midwinter. And so we've lost those days over the past 100 years, again, really consistently here in the Northeast. Here's a different view on the projections to 2100, where Dr. Burakowski has put this together, again, with these downward facing triangles showing us reductions in this case, percentage of snowmaking days. In this set of images, the map of the Northeast, lower emissions scenario is on the left and the higher emissions scenario on the right. And when she pulls out the data for high elevation areas where these ski areas are located, under the lower emissions scenario, they'll stand to lose 10 to 30% of the snowmaking days in that period of time before February 28th. And in the higher emissions scenario, it bumps up to 30 to 50%. So some pretty big implications for folks that are running ski areas, figuring out how to deal with this, how to adapt to these potentially changing conditions by the end of the century. Okay, this one is one of my favorites. Luckily, some of my friends are really poetic, but another thing people loved about winter is that it sort of provides a different lens, seeing the world in a different way. So it's a completely different relationship with the natural world. Where I swam, I now skate. Where I saw the presence of animals, I see tracks. Where I was so focused on making the best of summertime daylight hours, I now stare silently under a bowl of winter stars. I love winter for giving me that new relationship every year. And to me, some of this seeing the world in a different way reflects shifting seasons. So we're in the Northeast. Strong seasonality is kind of what we're all about, right? We have 4 seasons of the year. And those seasons, though, are shifting. We found in looking back again at 100 years of data that winters are getting shorter. Not a surprise, given that we just showed you that we're losing cold and snow. But across the northern forest, we've lost about 3 weeks of winter in 100 years. And during the 1910s, we had about 146 days of winter. And during the 2010s, we're down to about 126 days of winter as an average. So these graphs, which we call wedge plots, are showing us the trends in the start and end of winter, going at the top from the 19 teens, the bottom to the 2020 teens. And we see this wedge shape showing us shorter winters. And largely this is due to earlier spring onset, although some studies have also shown that fall is lasting longer. And here's a paper that I know Dr. Fisichella is familiar with because you're on this one. This has been seen at national parks throughout the US that used phenology data, the timing of first leaf out and blooms of plants as indicators of spring timing, of the timing of springtime. And all of the yellow and reddish colored dots here, the big orange line is actually the Appalachian Trail. Those yellows and reds are telling us that spring is happening earlier based on plant phenology, when the first leaves come out or the first blooms occur. And they're showing us that definitely here in the Northeast, plant timing is indicating earlier spring. So AMC is doing a few projects related to tracking seasonal shifts, how the seasons are changing. One is using plant phenology and canopy phenology. We have all of these cameras that are on time lapses that do focus on fall color change, but other seasonal shifts as well. And then we focus now as well on snow depth and the timing of snow melt. So I'll talk about a couple of those projects. One is iNaturalist, which you just mentioned. We're using the iNaturalist platform to crowdsource data about plant phenology. And so, as sounds like many of you might know, this is an app on your phone. You can use it just for fun. I'm always taking pictures of moths in my backyard and putting them on iNaturalist, and then the community of professional and amateur naturalists will identify what it is you have if you're not sure. And once enough people agree on the identification, it becomes research grade. And folks like our team at AMC will scoop in all of those research grade data and use them to make some scientific analyses, which is really exciting. So we love iNaturalist. One of our projects has been called Northeast Alpine Flower Watch, and was focused really on the alpine areas above tree line in the White Mountains, as well as over in Baxter State Park and in Vermont, and focused on the timing of these tiny little mountain flowers. Really exciting to get people out there who are out hiking, having fun, just spending the day, or maybe a long time, and happen to take pictures of some of these plants, or maybe they're volunteers who are really into this project and have taken a number of photos of these plants and added them to our project. So we had over 5,000 observations of these very specialized alpine plants. And it really highlights, how we can bring a ton of data in to use in these types of analyses and sort of expand our scientific knowledge. So this map is showing us again the area around Mount Washington, and the little green dots are where we have research plots set up using the National Phenology Network structure. We have some temperature logging going on, and interns and research staff go and monitor when the flowers are opening at these special alpine plots. And you'll see there are only a few clusters of the green plots. The orange dots are where people have taken pictures of some of these plants, and these observations are in iNaturalist, and it's just blanketing the mountain. So we're getting a lot more data, and we're able to fill in some spatial gaps. And importantly, Georgia Murray, who is the lead on our iNaturalist projects, has found that we're seeing a little bit different patterns when we pull in all of these other data, because we're filling more of the space. So first of all, iNaturalist data that we were able to pull into the project represented 3.5 times more data points than just our plots. So a larger number of points. This is for one flower, Diapensia. And the iNaturalist, or the citizen science collected data points, actually showed an earlier average flowering time and first flowering time than the plots only. So we're getting sites maybe at different elevations. We have more data. Sometimes the plots, because of laying things out randomly, may not have many of your target species. So we're catching the very first signs of spring by broadening the data set. So that's really exciting. So this year we have funding to expand. Not everyone can get to the Alpine area. And not everyone can get to the AT, but many more people can. So we have a project looking at different flowers, spring ephemerals like trillium and blue bead lily and all the beautiful flowers that we're so happy to see around here in May and June, and looking at those across the entire Appalachian Trail and areas adjacent to it. So we want to scoop in those spring ephemerals and do the same kind of analysis of is spring flowering happening earlier? Are we seeing the north to south sort of transect of the AT? And how does this play out at different elevations? Because the AT does go from low to high elevation. So that's a really exciting project. And if you find yourself anywhere near the Appalachian Trail this summer and see a spring ephemeral flower, snap a picture and we'll scoop it in. The other citizen or community science project that I get really excited about is community snow observations. And again, this is a national or actually international scale project where Oregon State is a key partner. And they're incorporating citizen science snow depth measurements to improve models about how much snow is across the landscape and how much water that snow contains. And we at AMC really want to know, how does snow vary in the mountains? It's extremely variable. You may know from going out hiking, and as you go uphill, you've got lots of different depths of snow, maybe even character of snow. It might be wetter. So snow is highly, highly variable, and we really don't have enough data scientifically. So we need to rely on models, and community snow observations provides information that validates the models and helps us learn more about snow all across space. It's really easy. I do this one in my backyard as well. You need a cell phone or another device, an app. We typically use a Mountain Hub app. It does lots of things, but you can also just put in snow. And this project mostly started out west where people carry avalanche probes. We don't do that too much in this part of the country unless you are on Mount Washington. So we're piloting some other pieces you can use, a yardstick or a folding ruler, or we're even creating stickers for hiking poles so people can use that to measure snow. And essentially you're heading out, taking a measurement of snow depth in the field, and they're validating these remote models of snow cover all across the country and world. And so here's an observation from last week. I've been taking snow measurements out in the woods near my house. And we just, again, you're measuring snow, snapping a picture of the ruler, putting in the number of how many centimeters or inches you measured. And then it goes into this bigger database. And so community snow observations is global. It looks like someone has had a pretty big push in Scandinavia there and covered the territory. But we can see a lot of the observations have focused on the West. The West has long recognized that snow is really important to fill aquifers, super important resource for drinking water. And it looks like there's a good amount of snow data here in the Northeast, but actually when we zoom in, we don't have as many data points as they do out West. So we really want to change that. And in Maine, there are actually quite few points to date. So we have a lot of points in the White Mountains at this point, but we're trying to really expand community snow through some of this funding where we're tying the snow data through to the phenology data and looking at that winter-spring shift. So I will give a brief summary of the science here. So winter conditions are indeed changing across the northern forest, across the Northeast. Winter is warming. It's warming faster than other seasons. The results are showing us, it's really clear that we have declining snowpack, the blanket of snow on the ground, and fewer days with snow cover. We are losing the cold, and winter is getting shorter. We have the earlier spring onset around the region. And unfortunately, the projections are telling us that that will continue into the future. And as you all know from many of the things you love about winter, we really think this could fundamentally change our ecosystems, our experiences of the seasons, even economics, thinking about forest practices and forest harvesting in the winter, having more mud days, which we also found statistically can influence how forests are harvested, and there are tons of impacts. I didn't mention ticks, that's a big one, and I know there's a lot of research going on around that here as well. So actually, Schoodic Institute's own Catherine Schmidt sent me this wonderful piece by E.B. White, another great Maine writer, who is writing about, since I started writing this column, snow has begun falling. Again, I sit in my room watching the reenactment of this stagey old phenomenon outside the window. For this picture, for this privilege, this cameo of New England with snow falling, I would give everything. Yet all the time, I know that this very loyalty, this feeling of being part of a special place, this respect for one's native scene, I know that such emotions have had a big part in the world's wars. Who is there big enough to love the whole planet? We must find such people for the next society. And sort of after thinking about all these data and the patterns and projections, what do we do about it? So one piece is we love to get people involved in science. So getting out, collecting data, learning about the scientific process, where the numbers come from, really helps people to understand and feel engaged with the science and understand how important it is to believe the science, for lack of a better term. Again, AMC has committed to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of organizations, cities, states are similarly committing to net zero emissions. Our commitment is by 2050. We have a research fellow who's developing a strategy right now to get us there. And so folks can always think about your own role in the carbon picture, calculate your carbon footprint, figure out ways to reduce. And land conservation. So AMC does focus on conservation, which helps in a couple of ways. Having large connected landscapes can be important as climate corridors for species to potentially move and access some refugia, and allowing places to remain conserved and forests to agrade and continue to take up carbon is one mitigation strategy, leaving forests as forests. So I wanted to close with this one. Acadia conveniently put this awesome picture of George Dorr on snowshoes on your Facebook page yesterday, so I snagged it. And wanted to mention some of the last things that folks in my circle said about what they love about winter really is about that sense of place. So fresh snow on the conifer trees, driving down a New England curvy road and seeing the snow on the trees. And this last one, the pinkish lavender skies in the late afternoon with the bare trees in winter. I look forward to that different light. And so here's George Dorr experiencing winter back at the early part of the 20th century here in Acadia. And it remains to be seen what that scene might look like by the end of this century. But it's really great to have this historic moment and look at what the winter looks like and think about our sense of place. With that, I will put up some acknowledgements for the variety of research that I mentioned here and be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson, for your talk. And in just a moment, we can get to some questions for Sarah. Before that, I do just want to also thank you all for coming today, and do check our website, our calendar of events for certainly tomorrow's final day of the Winter Festival and other upcoming events. And our science and education is possible through the wonderful support of folks such as you and our partner organizations. And this event is made possible through some sponsors, including the Bar Harbor Bank and Trust, the insurance agencies of Brown Homes and Milliken, Lynham Insurance Agency, Schoodic Insurance Services, and Winter Harbor Agency, and also Lynham Real Estate, Design Group Collaborative, E.L. Shea Builders and Engineers, W.S. Emerson, and Full Circle Printing. So, questions for Sarah?
Yes. I saw a couple hands. I don't know who. Oh, are you doing questions? Okay. This one. Yep. So community snow observations annually has these sort of challenges. If you're into, you know, that people do these social media challenges, they have data collection challenges every year. This one, you can jump in and submit your snow collection data, and they have, I believe, some prizes that they're giving out every week. So definitely, if you're interested in going out and measuring snow, it's a great time to do it. This is when we need the information to figure out when the snowpack is at its peak, and it can be used to model and look at potential flood flows around the region. So did you have a question? Yeah, that's a great question. So I have a couple of proposals related to the concept of cold climate refugia and how do forests influence the amount of snow and cold within certain areas. So thinking about, you know, we don't actually know very much about snow in the mountains. Again, it's just so variable. We know even less about snow under the trees. And if you've ever walked in the woods, you know, there are different depths of snow depending on whether it's a beech forest or a hemlock forest. And it sticks around for different lengths of time. So we really want to dig into that relationship and figure out how forests are influencing the amount of snow and cold. That's one exciting one. In the back. Yes. Yep. Yeah, so the question was in some of the figures, actually in a lot of the figures that had to do with the 100-year analysis in the middle of the country, not really in the middle of the country, middle of our region. Oh, back up. Yeah. So what we're calling central here, there can actually be a blue dot showing that the trend is going the other way. So it's actually getting colder, and that has been seen in some other meteorological analyses of the data. For some reason, some spots kind of around the Great Lakes region are actually getting colder for certain indicators. And we're not quite sure why, but the pattern in the Northeast is very striking in how consistent it is. So there are definitely other things going on in other parts of the country. Yes. Yeah. So the question is around what were the selection criteria for these sites that we use to show the 100 years of data. So we went through the National Weather Service has meteorological stations where weather data are collected. And we went through the entire data set and looked for places that had 100 years of data. And then there's annually, they tell you how complete the data set is. So as we all know from having things out in the weather, things break. So, or something doesn't function that day. So we had minimum criteria for how many observations were collected. If a weather station wasn't working for half the year, we didn't just want half the year's data. So it was related to having 100 years of data, and then within that 100 years, having data that had met the completeness criteria for each parameter: temperature, precipitation, snow. Yeah, so this is what you get. And we collect weather data at lots of places, but when you start sort of winnowing it down to the data that provide enough of a record to really look at these kind of trends, you have a much smaller set of points than all of the places that have ever collected weather data. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And partly, there is a weather station over at Acadia. It has moved. So there are some issues with trying to put the two records together from two different places. So there probably are some similar ones in Pennsylvania. That happens more than you think. They'll move it from the airport to some other location, and it's a whole process to try to see if you can use those together. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it has seemed like that. And again, here, just locally, anecdotally, no statistics behind this, but lake ice on was pretty late this year in a lot of places when the lakes froze over. So the question was around sort of that beginning of the cold season. I had certainly plenty of folks were talking about, was there going to be a white Christmas? There wasn't in a lot of places where they might have expected it. So our expectations are often different from what we're seeing. And we don't have a whole ton of data for lake ice is a really good indicator for shifting seasonality. And when the ice goes on lakes, when they're fully covered, we actually have less data than when the ice goes out, just because of how it's historically been collected. But that is another data set people are using that they can pull out of historical records. So yeah. Then I saw, did you still have a question down here? Ooh, the question is around, seems like a lot of bad news. Are we responding positively? Is human behavior responding positively to that? I don't really have the information to respond to that. I'm not a social scientist, and it can be sort of difficult and challenging, but there have been a lot of, there's been just a lot of action on the climate change front, especially with younger folks, Gen Z, and people really getting engaged with the process and the policy piece. So, we're hopeful that things could start to sort of sink in with the broader community of folks, and we can maybe start to make some of these changes and see, with things like the projections showing the difference it can make to reduce emissions, the hope is that that can help to change behaviors. I can't point to a specific social science data set.
You pull up one of those.
Yes. This is going to take a minute. I'm going the wrong way. It's going to take an extra minute. Other people notice that first.
And I think Sarah's research shows paying attention to the natural world and the changes that are ongoing is one really important piece. And then another is that the emissions trajectory that we're going to be on really matters. And there's a big difference in the low emissions versus the high emission scenario, and that we're already seeing change. It's going to continue, and we need to adapt to the ongoing changes. But we also need to make sure that we're mitigating the amount of future climate change. And I think Sarah showed some nice examples of ways to do that AMC is doing and taking actions on. So certainly for those of us that love winter, these are tough trends to look at, to see. And they're not going to go back in the other direction, but through human actions, we can at least slow the decline and get onto a better emission scenario.
That is the big message of this piece that just came out. Yeah. And was there another question over here? Sure. The scientific consensus is that, as we primarily burn fossil fuels, although there are other sources, we're emitting pollutants into the atmosphere, including carbon dioxide, that's the big one, and other greenhouse gases. And those types of air pollutants in those concentrations drive our climate system. They drive the temperature, and in the case of snow, you've got to have cold temperatures. It's one of those, like, there's a hard physical threshold. If you're not able to get things cold enough to make snow or to have snow, it's not going to be there. So it's sort of the greenhouse gas emissions driving our overall temperature and then influencing how much snow is falling and then ultimately staying on the ground. Is that what you mean? Yep. Yeah. Thank you. It was great to be here.